I was sitting alone in that little coffee shop, staring at the door and trying to convince myself I didn't care if he showed up. Then two little girls walked in, matching red jackets, curls bouncing, eyes full of determination. They marched straight to my table and said, "Our daddy's sorry he's late." And right there, before I even met him, my life quietly began to change. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. Just a coffee, just an evening, just one more try at proving I could still open up to someone. But sitting there at that little corner table in the Maple Avenue Cafe, staring at the door that refused to open, it didn't feel small at all. My name's Kayla Emerson, and that night I learned that sometimes the best things in life start with disappointment. It was 6:47 p.m., and my so-called blind date was 17 minutes late. I'd already checked my phone half a dozen times, watching my chamomile tea go cold. Around me, couples leaned close over their drinks, whispering and laughing like the whole world existed only for them. Meanwhile, I sat there alone, pretending I wasn't counting every second. Diane, my friend from work, had been the one to set this up. "Just one date," she'd said. "He's a good man, Kayla. You'll like him." His name was Matthew Caldwell, 34, an engineer, apparently polite, funny, maybe even charming. But trust didn't come easy for me. 2 years of burying myself in my veterinary clinic had made sure of that. The bell above the cafe door finally rang, and my heart jumped. But instead of a man in his 30s, two little girls marched inside. Identical twins, maybe 6 years old, with curls bouncing and matching red jackets. They looked around like tiny detectives on a mission. When their eyes landed on me, they froze, whispered to each other, and then walked straight toward my table. "Are you Miss Kayla?" the taller one asked, deadly serious. I blinked. Yes." She nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'm Daisy. This is my sister, Hazel. Our daddy says sorry he's late." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. "Your daddy?" "Matthew Caldwell," Daisy said proudly, folding her little hands on the table like a tiny executive. "He's your date. He couldn't come yet, but we came instead." Hazel tugged at her sister's sleeve. "He doesn't know we're here," she whispered. "He's working," Daisy added quickly, shooting Hazel a look. "Something about a big building and a foundation." I couldn't help it. I laughed. The situation was too strange, too sweet. "So, you two just decided to show up for him?" "We heard him last night," Hazel said softly. "He was sad he'd miss it. He said he really wanted to meet you." They looked so proud, sitting there with their feet not touching the floor, that something in me softened. I waved the barista over and ordered 2 hot chocolates with extra whipped cream. The girls' faces lit up like Christmas morning. As they sipped, they told me about their dad, how he learned to braid their hair from YouTube, how he made grilled cheese with 3 kinds of cheese, and how he still sang their mom's favorite songs even though his voice isn't as pretty. Their mom, they said, had gone to heaven 2 years ago, and somehow, in the middle of their chatter and whipped cream mustaches, I felt a lump form in my throat. He sounded like a man who carried his family through fire and still made it look gentle. By the time Daisy leaned across the table and said, "We wanted him to be happy again," I knew this wasn't going to be just another blind date story. It was the start of something none of us could have planned, least of all me. By the time their mugs were half empty and their whipped cream mustaches started to melt, I already knew those two girls were trouble in the best way possible. Daisy talked like she'd been negotiating business deals her whole life, and Hazel had that quiet, careful tone kids get when they think too much for their age. When they told me their dad was working late at a construction site, I asked if he knew they were here. Hazel gave a guilty shake of the head. "He doesn't," she whispered. "He was so sad last night. We heard him say he really wanted to meet you, but had to fix a problem with the library building." I smiled despite myself. "So you decided to save his date?" "Rescue," Daisy corrected. "We rescued it before it died." Something about the way she said it, that blend of logic and 6-year-old confidence, made me laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. I glanced out the window and spotted an older woman waiting patiently in a parked sedan. "Your babysitter?" The girls nodded proudly. "Mrs. Ferguson," Hazel said. "She drove us. We told her it was very important." "I bet you did," I said, fighting another laugh. "So, if your dad's working late, maybe we could bring him dinner? He's probably starving." The idea hit them like fireworks. "Yes," Daisy gasped. "Chinese food. He loves orange chicken and sweet and sour pork." 5 minutes later, I was on my phone placing an order at Golden Palace while the twins chattered about how their dad once tried to cook Chinese food himself and nearly burned the kitchen. Mrs. Ferguson didn't even argue much when I explained our plan, just sighed, smiled, and told the girls to buckle up. By the time we pulled into the construction site, the sky had darkened to deep navy. Floodlights threw long shadows across steel beams and half-built walls. It looked like a movie set, loud, bright, and alive. Matthew Caldwell stood inside a temporary office trailer, sleeves rolled up, hair messy, blueprints scattered across a folding table. Even from outside, I could see exhaustion written all over him. Daisy knocked 3 sharp times on the door before I could stop her. When he looked up and saw his daughters, his whole face froze. Confusion, panic, and then disbelief. And then his eyes landed on me. "You're Kayla," he said slowly. "And you're here? With them?" "Surprise," Daisy announced proudly. "We brought dinner." He blinked at me like he was trying to process a dream that didn't make sense. I swear I had no idea they. "Relax," I said, holding up the takeout bags. "Your daughters said you skipped dinner, and I wasn't about to let them down." Matthew rubbed a hand through his hair, laughing in disbelief. "Unbelievable. You two really did this." "We didn't just do it," Hazel said softly. "We fixed it." He crouched to their level, pulled them both into his arms, and kissed the tops of their heads. "You two are something else." Then he looked up at me again, eyes tired but kind. "I can't tell if I should apologize or thank you." "Try both," I said with a smile. "And maybe let me help set the table before the noodles get cold." He laughed again, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deeper than politeness. And in that cramped trailer full of blueprints, sawdust, and takeout boxes, something small and unexpected sparked to life. Saturday morning came faster than I expected, and I'll admit, I was nervous. After all, it's not every day you have breakfast with a man you technically met on a rescue mission. But there I was, standing on Matthew Caldwell's front porch at exactly 7:58 a.m., clutching a small box of pastries and wondering if I was completely out of my mind. Before I could even knock, the door swung open and 2 small voices screamed in unison. "You came! You came!" Daisy and Hazel, still in matching pajamas, grabbed my hands and pulled me inside before I could say a word. The house smelled like butter, vanilla, and coffee, the kind of scent that feels like home even when it's not yours yet. Toys were stacked neatly in baskets by the couch, drawings covered the fridge, and sunlight poured through the kitchen window, landing on Matthew himself. He wore jeans and a freshly ironed blue shirt, the same one his daughters had told me about, and he had a little smudge of flour on his cheek. He looked up from the stove, spatula in hand, and smiled in a way that made the whole morning brighter. "You made it," he said. "I did," I said, setting the pastry box on the counter. "And I hear there are famous butterfly pancakes around here." "They're the best," Hazel announced proudly. "Sometimes they look like blobs, but we eat those too." Matthew chuckled, flipping another pancake with an easy confidence. "Don't listen to her. I've perfected the butterfly shape." Mostly. The twins climbed into their chairs, chattering about school projects and Halloween costumes while I helped set the table. It wasn't fancy, just a regular Saturday breakfast, but something about it felt special, comfortable, real. When we finally sat down to eat, Hazel leaned across the table, studying my plate seriously. "You didn't get enough syrup," she said, and before I could argue, she fixed it herself, pouring a perfect amber river across my pancakes. Matthew caught my eye and smiled. "Told you they take charge." After breakfast, Hazel reappeared holding a hairbrush. "Daddy does braids," she said, "but can you try?" So I did. I sat on the couch with Hazel between my knees, gently brushing her curls while Daisy showed me their art projects from school. Across the room, Matthew washed dishes, but I could feel his gaze every so often. When our eyes met, there was something in it, a mix of gratitude and curiosity, like he was trying to understand how this morning had happened so naturally. When I finished the braid, Hazel turned to the mirror and smiled. "It's pretty," she said softly. "Not as good as your dad's," I teased. "Maybe just as good," she said, grinning. "Treehouse," Daisy suddenly shouted. "We have to show her the treehouse." Matthew laughed. "You sure? It's not exactly a tourist attraction. It's a castle," Daisy said with all the authority in the world. So we went. The air outside was crisp, full of that early autumn sharpness. The treehouse stood proud in a big oak tree, weathered wood, rope ladder, and a small window trimmed with flowers. At the base of the ladder, Hazel leaned close and whispered, "You have to know the password." I crouched down, playing along. "What is it?" "Mommy's angels," she whispered. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just nodded and whispered it back, "Mommy's angels." The girls smiled, grabbed the rope, and climbed up, laughter echoing through the yard. Matthew stood beside me, hands in his pockets, looking up at them. "Built it the summer after she passed," he said quietly. "Needed something that would last. Something for them." I didn't say anything. I just stood there beside him, watching the girls wave from their wooden castle, realizing this wasn't just a morning of pancakes and braids. It was the beginning of something I didn't know I'd been missing, a home I hadn't expected to find. What started as one breakfast became many. It didn't happen with some grand plan or declaration. It just unfolded, piece by piece, like life does when you stop trying to control it. Before I knew it, I was spending more weekends at the Caldwell house than at my own. The twins called me Miss Kayla for months, even though I told them they didn't have to. They said it sounded polite, which, coming from two 6-year-olds with whipped cream mustaches, felt hilarious. Every time I walked through that door, they ran to me with some new project: art, costumes, stories about school. And somehow, without meaning to, I became part of their rhythm. Matthew and I grew closer in quiet ways. He'd stop by my clinic with coffee after his morning site meetings. I'd bring the girls by to feed the animals on weekends. Sometimes we'd talk about work, sometimes about nothing at all. The best moments were the simple ones. The four of us laughing in the kitchen, dancing badly to old pop songs while pancakes burned on the stove. Fall came fast. Leaves turned gold and red, and the air carried that sharp scent of change. I went to Daisy and Hazel's school play one night. They were dressed as singing flowers, proudly waving from the stage. I sat in the crowd, cheering louder than anyone else. When I looked over, Matthew was watching them too, but then he looked at me. And in that look, something shifted. Gratitude, admiration, maybe something more. Later that month, I helped the girls carve pumpkins. Matthew tried to make a bad shape, failed miserably, and pretended it was intentional. We laughed until we cried. The girls were giggling so hard they dropped pumpkin seeds everywhere. And that night, after they'd gone to bed, Matthew and I stood by the back door, watching the porch light flicker across the yard. "She would have loved this," he said quietly. "You, them, all of it." I didn't need to ask who she was. I just reached for his hand. He squeezed mine gently, then let go like he was scared to hold on too long. Weeks passed like that, steady, peaceful, unspoken, until one snowy evening in December, when words finally ran out. We were on his couch, a movie playing that neither of us was really watching. The girls had fallen asleep between us, warm and soft against my arms. The only sound in the room was their breathing. Matthew looked over them and met my eyes. "I don't want you to leave," he said quietly. "I don't want to go," I whispered. He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and before either of us could second-guess it, we kissed. It wasn't perfect, it was hesitant, trembling, but it was real. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "I already did," I said back. Upstairs, two little matchmakers were quietly peeking through the banister, whispering and giggling into the dark. "Daddy's happy again," Hazel said. "We did good," Daisy whispered. 6 months later, I walked into the same coffee shop where it had all started. The bell over the door rang, and for a second, I felt that same nervous flutter from the night everything changed. The difference was this time, I wasn't waiting alone. Matthew was already there, sitting at our old table in the corner. The one where I once sat with cold tea and no expectations. When he saw me, he smiled. That warm, steady smile that had carried me through every day since. "I thought we were meeting at the restaurant on 5th, I said, walking over. He shook his head slightly. "Change of plans. Come sit." Something in his voice made me stop joking. His hands were shaking a little, and there was a small velvet box on the table between 2 mugs of coffee. My heart stuttered. "Matthew." He took a breath, his voice soft but certain. 6 months ago, I was supposed to meet you right here. I was 17 minutes late, and I thought I'd already blown my chance. But 2 little girls had other plans. I felt my throat tighten as he kept going. They walked through that door, sat right there, and changed my whole life. They brought me back to living again, Kayla. But you gave me the courage to love again. to believe that it's okay to start over. He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring that caught the light just right. You walked into our lives when we needed you most, he said. You loved my daughters like they were yours. You brought music back into this house, laughter back into my days, and peace back into my heart. You're my second chance, Kayla. Will you marry me? For a second, I couldn't even breathe. Then I nodded. Once, twice, and finally found my voice. Yes. God, yes. He slid the ring onto my finger with hands that were still shaking, and then the bell above the door rang again. Two familiar voices shouted. We knew it. Daisy and Hazel burst into the cafe, running straight for us, arms wide, faces glowing. Behind them, Mrs. Ferguson followed, smiling like she'd been in on it the whole time. We picked the ring. Hazel yelled proudly. Do you like it? I love it, I said, laughing through tears. And I love you both. Matthew wrapped his arms around all three of us, and for a moment, the whole world shrank to that tiny table and the sound of two little girls giggling through happy tears. A year later, in the backyard under the same oak tree that held their castle, Matthew and I said our vows. Daisy and Hazel walked down the aisle in matching butterfly dresses, carrying a single white rose. They placed it on an empty chair in the front row, a chair for their mother. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at Matthew, then at the girls, and said, I came to a coffee shop looking for a date. I found two little matchmakers instead. They saved this story before it ever began. Sometimes love doesn't show up on time. Sometimes it's 17 minutes late, but right on schedule for your heart. Matthew took my hands, eyes glistening. You gave me permission to love again, he said quietly, and I'll spend the rest of my life loving you for that. When we kissed, the girls cheered louder than everyone combined. And as the sun dipped behind the treehouse, I whispered a promise to the woman who had loved them first. I'll take care of them. I'll love them for both of us. Sometimes the best stories don't start perfectly. They start late, with laughter, chaos, and two determined little girls who refuse to let love slip away.